Continuing Themistocles from Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. But when the news came from Thermopylae to Artemisium, informing them that the king Leonidas was slain, and that Xerxes had made himself master of all the passages by land, they returned back to the interior of Greece, the Athenians having the command of the rear, the place of honor and danger, and much elated by what had been done. As Themistocles sailed along the coast, he took notice of the harbors and fit places for the enemy's ships. To come to land at, and engraved large letters in such stones as he found there by chance, as also in others, which he set up on purpose, near to the landing places, are where they were to water, in which inscriptions he called upon the Ionians to forsake Medes, if it were possible, and to come over to the Greeks, who were the proper founders and fathers, and were now hazarding all for their liberties. But if this could not be done, at any rate to impede and disturb the Persians in all engagements, he hoped that these writings would prevail with the Ionians to revolt, or raise some trouble by making their fidelity doubtful to the Persians. Now, through Xerxes had already passed through Doris and invaded the country of Phasis, and was burning and destroying the cities of the Phaeacians. Yet the Greeks sent them no relief, and though the Athenians earnestly desired them to meet the Persians in Boeotia before they could come to Attica, as they themselves had come forward by sea at Artemisium, they gave no ear to their requests, being wholly intent upon Peloponnesus, and resolved to gather all their forces together within the isthmus, and to build a wall from sea to sea in that narrow neck of land, so that the Athenians were enraged to see themselves betrayed, and at the same time afflicted and dejected at their own destitution, for to fight alone against such a numerous army was to no purpose, and the only expedient now left them was to leave their city and cling to their ships, which the people were very unwilling to submit to, imagining that it would signify little now to gain a victory, and not understanding how there could be deliverance any longer after they had once forsaken the temples of what they considered to be their gods, and exposed the tombs and monuments of their ancestors to the fury of their enemies. Themistocles, being at a loss, and not able to draw the people over to his opinion by any human reason, set his machines to work as in a theater, and employed prodigies and oracles. The serpent of Minerva, kept in the inner part of her temple, disappeared. The priest gave it out to the people, that the offerings which were set for it were found untouched, and declared by the suggestion of Themistocles that this being that they considered to be a goddess, had left the city and taken her flight before them towards the sea. And he often urged them with the oracle, which bade them trust to walls of wood, showing them that walls of wood could signify nothing else but ships, and that the islands of Salamis was termed in it, not miserable or unhappy, but had the epithet of a divine, for that it should be one day associated with the great fortune of the Greeks. At length his opinion prevailed, and he obtained a decree that the city should be committed to the protection of Minerva, Queen of Athens, that they who were of age to bear arms should embark, and that each should see to sending away his children, women, and slaves where he could. This decree being confirmed, most of the Athenians removed their parents, wives, and children to Troezen, where they were received with eager goodwill by the Troezenians, who passed a vote that they should be maintained at the public charge by a daily payment of 2 obols every one, and leave be given to the children to gather fruit, where they pleased, and schoolmasters paid to instruct them. This vote was proposed by Nicagoras, and I think the least common Greek letter is the zeta, or what's is that the word for Z? There was no public treasure at that time in Athens, but the council of Areopagus, as Aristotle says, distributed to everyone that served 8 drachmas, which was a great help to the manning of the fleet. But Clidemus ascribes this also to the art of Themistocles, when the Athenians were on their way down to the haven of Piraeus. The shield with the head of Medusa was missing, and he, under the pretext of searching for it, ransacked all places, and found among their goods considerable sums of money concealed, which he applied to the public use. And with this, the soldiers and seamen were well provided for their voyage. Now, I don't agree with, perhaps everybody take part, and those who are rich take part more, but this idea of seizing when people have a little bit extra or something like this, almost always is something the government should not do. Not a little bit, obviously a lot extra, but when the whole city of Athens were going on board, it afforded a spectacle worthy alike of pity and admiration, to see them thus send away their fathers and children before them, and, unmoved with their cries and tears, passed over into the island. But that which stirred compassion most of all was, that many old men, by reason of their great age, were left behind, and even the tame domestic animals could not be seen without some pity, running about the town and howling, as desirous to be carried along with their masters that had kept them, among which it is reported that Xanthippus, the father of Pericles, had a dog that would not endure to stay behind, but leaped into the sea, and swam along by the galley's side till he came to the island of Salamis, where he fainted away and died. And that spot in the island, which is still called the dog's grave, is said to be his. Well, what's the name of the dog? A lot of people never name their dogs, but among the great actions of Themistocles at this crisis, the recall of Aristides was not the least, for before the war he had been ostracized by the party which Themistocles headed, and was in banishment. But now, perceiving that the people regretted his absence, and were fearful that he might go over to the Persians to revenge himself, and thereby ruin the affairs of Greece, Themistocles proposed a decree that those who were banished for a time might return again, to give assistance by word and deed to the cause of Greece, with the rest of their fellow citizens. Eurybiades, by reason of the greatness of Sparta, was admiral of the Greek fleet, but yet was faint-hearted in time of danger, and willing to weigh anchor and set sail for the Isthmus of Corinth, near which the land army lay encamped. Themistocles resisted, and this was the occasion of the well-known words when Eurybiades, to check his impatience, told him that at the Olympic games they that start up before the rest are lashed, and they replied, Themistocles, that are left behind are not crowned. Again, Eurybiades, lifting up his staff, as if he were going to strike, Themistocles said, Strike if you will, but here Eurybiades, wondering much at his moderation, desired him to speak, and Themistocles now brought him to a better understanding, and when one who stood by him told him that it did not become those who had neither city nor house to lose, to persuade others to relinquish their habitations and forsake their countries, Themistocles gave this reply, We have indeed left our houses and our walls, base fellow, not thinking it fit to become slaves for the sake of things that have no life nor soul, and yet our city is the greatest of all, Greece, consisting of 200 galleys, which are here to defend you, if you please. But if you run away and betray us, as you did once before, the Greeks shall soon hear news of the Athenians possessing as fair a country and as large and free a city as that they have lost. These expressions of Themistocles made Eurybiades suspect that if he retreated, the Athenians would fall off from him. When one of Eretria began to oppose him, he said, Have you anything to say of war that are like an inkfish? You have a sword, but no heart. Some say that while Themistocles was thus speaking upon the deck, an owl was seen flying to the right hand of the fleet, which came and sat upon the top of the mast. And this happy omen so far disposed the Greeks to follow his advice that they presently prepared to fight. Well, you can interpret these things how you want. You could say, "Oh, you're going to be surpassed in knowledge." Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Yet, when the enemy's fleet was arrived at the haven of Phalerum upon the coast of Attica, and with a number of their ships concealed all the shore, and when they saw the king himself in person come down with his land army to the seaside, with all his forces united, then the good counsel of Themistocles was soon forgotten, and the Peloponnesians cast their eyes again toward the Isthmus, and took it very ill if anyone spoke against their returning home, and resolving to depart that night, the pilots had orders what course to steer. Themistocles, in great distress that the Greeks should retire, and lose the advantage of the narrow seas and straight passage, and slip home, every one to his own city, considered with himself, and contrived that stratagem that was carried out by Sicinius. This Sicinius was a Persian captive, but a great lover of Themistocles, and the attendant of his children. Upon this occasion he sent him privately to Xerxes, commanding him to tell the king that Themistocles, the admiral of the Athenians, having espoused his interest, wished to be the first to inform him that the Greeks were ready to make their escape, and that he counseled him to hinder their flight, to set upon them while they were in this confusion, and at a distance from their land army, and hereby destroy all their forces by sea. Xerxes was very joyful at this message, and received it as from one who wished him all that was good. and immediately issued instructions to the commanders of his ships that they should instantly set out with 200 galleys to encompass all the islands and enclose all the straits and passages, that none of the Greeks might escape, and that they should afterwards follow with the rest of their fleet at leisure. This being done, Aristides, the son of Lysimachus, was the first man that perceived it, and went to the tent of Themistocles, not out of any friendship, for he had been formerly banished by his means, as has been related, but to inform him how they were encompassed by their enemies. Themistocles, knowing the generosity of Aristides, and much struck by his visit at that time, imparted to him all that he had transacted by Sicanus, and entreated him that, as he would be more readily believed among the Greeks, he would make use of his credit to help to induce them to stay and fight their enemies in the narrow seas. Aristides applauded Themistocles and went to the other commanders and captains of the galleys and encouraged them to engage. Yet they did not perfectly assent to him till a galley of Tenos, which deserted from the Persians, of which Panatius was commander, came in while they were still doubting, and confirmed the news that all the straits and passages were beset, and then their rage and fury, as well as their necessity, provoked them all to fight. Provoked them all to fight. As soon as it was day, Xerxes placed himself high up to view his fleet and how it was set in order. Phanodemus says, he set upon a promontory above the temple of Hercules, where the coast of Attica is separated from the island by a narrow channel. But Acestodorus writes that it was in the confines of Megara, upon those hills, which are called the Horns, where he sat in a chair of gold, with many secretaries about him, to write down all that was done in the fight. All that was done in the fight. When Themistocles was about to sacrifice, close to the admiral's galley, there were 3 prisoners brought to him, fine-looking men, and richly dressed in ornamented clothing and gold, said to be the children of Artauctes and Sondaus, sister to Xerxes. As soon as the prophet Euphrates saw them, and observed that at the same time the fire blazed out from the offerings with a more than ordinary flame. A sibyl, really. And a man sneezed on the right, which was an intimation of a fortunate event. He took Themistocles by the hand and bade him consecrate the 3 young men for sacrifice and offer them up with prayers for victory to Bacchus the Devourer. So should the Greeks not only save themselves, but also obtain victory. Now, the Gospel of John is actually a rewrite of a text about Bacchus. It's over 90% the same text, but I understand with the lack of human sacrifice in the formally in the Christian Bible, you know why Christianity won out with that one. Themistocles was much disturbed at this strange and terrible prophecy, but the common people, who in any difficult crisis and great exigency ever look for relief rather to strange and extravagant than to reasonable means, calling upon Bacchus with one voice, led the captives to the altar and compelled the execution of the sacrifice, as the prophet had commanded. This is reported by Phanius the Lesbian, someone from Lesbos, not the other thing. A philosopher well read in history, the number of the enemy's ships, the poet Aeschylus gives in his tragedy, called the Persians, as on his certain knowledge, in the following words: Xerxes, I know, did into battle lead 1,000 ships of more than usual speed, 7,200, so it is agreed. And Aeschylus and others, I guess we can look up what these things are in Greek, but we really don't get a sense of if they rhyme or what the deal is. Often these things are much better sounding in the original language. The Athenians had 180. In every ship 18 men fought upon the deck, 4 of whom were archers and the rest men at arms, as Themistocles had fixed upon the most advantageous place. So with no less sagacity he chose the best time of fighting, for he would not run the prows of his galleys against the Persians, nor begin the fight till the time of day was come, when there regularly blows in a fresh breeze from the open sea, and brings in with it a strong swell into the channel, which was no inconvenience to the Greek ships, which were low built and little above the water, but did much to hurt the Persians, which had high sterns and lofty decks, and were heavy and cumbrous in their movements, as it presented them broadside to the quick charges of the Greeks, who kept their eyes upon the motions of Themistocles as their best example, and more particularly because opposed to his ship, Ariamenes, admiral to Xerxes, a brave man, and by far the best and worthiest of the king's brothers, was seen throwing darts and shooting arrows from his huge galley, as from the walls of a castle. Amenias, the Deucalion, and Sasicles, the Pedian, who sailed in the same vessel upon the ships, meeting stem to stem, and transfixing each the other with their brazen prows, so that they were fastened together, when Ariamenes attempted to board theirs, ran at him with their pikes, and thrust him into the sea. His body, as it floated amongst the other shipwrecks, was known to Artemisia, and carried to Xerxes. It is reported that in the middle of the flight a great flame rose into the air above the city of Eleusis, and that sounds and voices were heard through all the Thriasian plain, as far as the sea, sounding like a number of men accompanying and escorting the mystic Iacchus, and that a mist seemed to form and rise from the place from whence the sounds came, and passing forward fell upon the galleys. Others believed that they saw apparitions in the shape of armed men reaching out their hands from the island of Agina before the Grecian galleys, and supposed they were the Aeacida, whom they had invoked to their aid before the battle. The first man that took a ship was Achamedes, the Athenian, captain of the galley, who cut down its ensign and dedicated it to Apollo, the laurel-crowned. And as the Persians fought in a narrow arm of the sea, and could bring but part of their fleet to flight, and fell foul of one another, the Greeks thus equalled them in strength, and fought with them till the evening forced them back, and obtained, as says Simonides, that noble and famous victory, than which neither amongst the Greeks nor barbarians was ever known more glorious exploit on the seas, by the joint valor indeed and zeal of all who fought, but by the wisdom and sagacity of Themistocles. Now, people will generally, whatever they've decided to worship, they'll attribute what they see or some other event to those that they prayed to. There's also the art of projection, which people don't quite know, but they're, in a state where they're very sincere about it, and as a group they could likewise see that. But sometimes there's, whatever other, something decides to join in, and people are able to witness it. Again, because of the state that people are in. After this sea flight, Xerxes enraged at his ill fortune, attempted, by casting great heaps of earth and stones into the sea, to stop up the channel, and make a dam, upon which he might lead his land forces over in the island of Salamis. Themistocles, being desirous to try the opinion of Aristides, told him that he proposed to sail for the Hellespont, to break the bridge of ships, so as to shut up, he said, Asia, a prisoner within Europe. Because when we look in the Bible and say, well, to Asia, no, we're not talking about the same thing. But Aristides, disliking the design, said, we have hitherto fought with an enemy who has regarded little else but his pleasure and luxury. But if we shut him up within Greece and drive him to necessity, he that is master of such great forces will no longer sit quietly with an umbrella of gold over his head, looking upon the fight for his pleasure, but in such a strait will attempt all things. He will be resolute and appear himself in person upon all occasions. He will soon correct his errors and supply what he has formerly omitted through remissness, and will be better advised in all his things. Therefore it is no ways our interest, Themistocles, he said, to take away the bridge that is already made, but rather to build another, if it were possible, that he might make his retreat with the more expedition. To which Themistocles answered, if this be requisite, we must immediately use all diligence, art, and industry to rid ourselves of him as soon as may be. And to this purpose he found out among the captives one of the king of Persia's eunuchs, named Artachus, whom he sent to the king to inform him that the Greeks, being now victorious by sea, had decreed to sail to the Hellespont, where the boats were fastened together, and destroy the bridge, but that Themistocles, being concerned for the king, revealed this to him, that he might hasten toward the Asiatic seas and pass over into his own dominions, and in the meantime would cause delays and hinder the confederates from pursuing him. Xerxes no sooner heard this, but being very much terrified, he proceeded to retreat out of Greece with all speed. The prudence of Themistocles and Aristides in this was afterwards more fully understood at the battle of Plataea, where Mardonius, with a very small fraction of the forces of Xerxes, put the Greeks in danger of losing all. Herodotus writes that of all the cities of Greece, Aegina was held to have performed the best service in the war, while all single men yielded to Themistocles, though out of envy unwillingly, and when they returned to the entrance of Peloponnesus, where the several commanders delivered their suffrages at the altar to determine who was the most worthy, every one gave the vote for himself, and the second for Themistocles. The Daemonians carried him with them to Sparta, where, giving the rewards of valor to Eurybiades, and of wisdom and conduct to Themistocles, they crowned him with olive, presented him with the best chariot in the city, and sent 300 young men to accompany him to the confines of their country. And at the next Olympic Games, when Themistocles entered the course, the spectators took no farther notice of those who were contesting the prizes, but spent the whole day in looking upon him, showing him to the strangers, admiring him, and applauding him by clapping their hands, and other expressions of joy, so that he himself, much gratified, confessed to his friends that he then reaped the fruit of all his labors for the Greeks. He was indeed by nature a great lover of honor, as is evident from the anecdotes recorded of him. When chosen admiral by the Athenians, he would not quite conclude any single matter of business, either public or private, but deferred all till the day they were to set sail, that, by dispatching a great quantity of business all at once, and having to meet a great variety of people, he might make an appearance of greatness and power. Viewing the dead bodies cast up by the sea, he perceived bracelets and necklaces of gold about them, yet passed on, only showing them to a friend that followed him, saying, "Take you these things, for you are not Themistocles." He said to Antiphates, a handsome young man who had formerly avoided, but now in his glory courted him, "Time, young man, has taught us both a lesson." And so we see formerly, don't just go to war because you enjoy it. And here we're saying, don't just do it because you're you're trying to get wealth. I mean, don't, if what you enjoy is what you enjoy. It's more about what you believe in your actions. And what worldly rewards you get, no reason to turn down the worldly rewards of what you do. He said that the Athenians did not honor him or admire him, but made, as it were, a sport of plane tree of him, sheltered themselves under him in bad weather, and as soon as it was fine, plucked his leaves and cut his branches. When the Seriphian told him that he had not obtained this honor by himself, but by the greatness of the city, he replied, "You speak truth. I should never have been famous if I had been